Those of you who have listened to a podcast or two have probably figured out by now that I am not the biggest fan of CVs. In the first half of the 20th century, next to battleships, carriers quickly became the largest and most expensive ships a nation could build. By the end of World War II, they had proven themselves capable enough to surpass battleships as the ultimate status symbol for a country with naval ambitions. So in this latest installment of Cursed Ship Images, we're diving into the high-stakes world of aircraft carriers. Or at least ships that claim to be aircraft carriers. Except instead of launching victory and dominance, these floating disasters mostly launch confusion, fire, and eventually themselves to the bottom of the sea. And one of these ships even went from commissioning to submarine bait in less than 2 weeks. 5 ships, 5 flight decks, and 0 functioning design committees. So buckle up, dear viewer, stow your tray tables, and prepare for a rough landing. Kicking off the list is Kaga, the Japanese aircraft carrier that took the phrase leveling up way too literally. Weirdly, Kaga is the only ship in this lineup that sort of worked. But that doesn't mean she escaped the cursed label. No. She earned it. Laid down as a Tosa-class battleship, she was awkwardly reborn as a carrier thanks to the Washington Naval Treaty. Originally designed with 3 stacked flight decks like a Tokyo department store, Kaga was the Navy's attempt to innovate by confusing pilots and engineers alike. The top flight deck proved usable. The middle deck, at only 49 feet long, was basically a sneeze guard for seagulls, and the lowest one? Perfect if your plane was launched with a rubber band. Eventually, the Japanese realized, hey, this is really dumb, and gave up on the nesting doll flight deck and rebuilt her with a single, normal flight deck in the 1930s. In December of 1941, she participated in the attack on Pearl Harbor, and then 6 months later, exploded spectacularly at Midway. Karma really showed up fast for this one. At Midway, her design flaws, like the placement of her aviation fuel tanks, helped turn a bomb hit into a barbecue. She didn't just burn, she dissolved. She exploded, caught fire, exploded again, and was eventually scuttled. Honestly, she might have set the speed run record for most internal fires triggered by one dive bombing run. But as the only carrier on this list with any semblance of a combat record, goofy looks aside, Kaga is the least cursed on this list. What do you think? Next we have Bern, France's one and only World War II era aircraft carrier, and possibly the world's first carrier in witness protection. She started life as a Normandy-class battleship back in 1914, but by the time she was launched in 1920, she was already obsolete. So the French Navy shrugged and said, well, since all the cool kids are doing it now, let's glue a flight deck on top of this battleship hull and call it a carrier. She ended up shorter than your average cruiser, but wider than an Iowa-class battleship. Her top speed was just over 21 knots, slow enough to make snails go, mon Dieu. She was meant to keep up with the fleet, but mostly just waved from the horizon. In her entire career, she never launched an aircraft in combat. Not one. Instead, her biggest wartime achievement was acting like an armored truck. She hauled 147 metric tons of gold bullion to Halifax, Canada, to pay for American weapons France would never use. That's right. While other navies were dodging torpedoes, Bern was doing door-to-door banking. So what happened when World War II broke out? Why don't we remember this glorious defender of France? Well, she was conveniently unavailable. She stayed parked in Martinique, sipping rum, doing anti-air drills, and letting someone else handle the whole Nazi invasion thing.
I'm drinking wine and eating cheese and catching some rays, you know.
The French Navy called it strategic redeployment. We call it hiding with style. If ships could ghost their responsibilities, Bern would have blocked World War II on every social media platform. To be fair, she did help out, as a floating apartment building after the war. Bern was converted into a barrack ship for submariners because if there's one thing the ship was good at, it was not moving. In the end, she wasn't scrapped until 1967, outliving more successful carriers simply by staying completely uninvolved. Cursed or blessed? You decide.
Landa, da sind Sie ja.
Now we enter the fever dream that is, and I'm only gonna do this once, Kriegsmarine Flugzeugträger A Graf Zeppelin. Nazi Germany's only attempt at building a proper fleet carrier, laid down in 1936, launched in 1938, and then forgotten after a pesky border dispute in 1939. She was 861 feet long, only 11 feet shorter than an Essex-class carrier, but somehow only carried 42 planes. That's fewer aircraft than her own name has syllables. So what did they do with all that leftover space? Well, they crammed it with enough guns to qualify her as a battlecruiser with identity issues. Her secondary battery included 16 150mm guns and armored casemates, because apparently the Germans cared more about fighting destroyers at point-blank range than they did launching planes. Graf Zeppelin was so overarmed and underplaned, it practically begged to be torpedoed out of pity, and it almost was. Several times. By her own Navy. She was 85% complete by the end of 1939 when all work stopped, then started again, then stopped again, and eventually they just gave up and used her as a torpedo target. The Soviets eventually finished the job in 1947 after briefly flirting with salvaging her, because even an unfinished meme of a German aircraft carrier is better than the nothing they had at the time. But you know what the real tragedy here is? She wasn't sunk by combat, sabotage, or airstrike. No, Graf Zeppelin died of bureaucracy, egos, and deep-seated political infighting. Goering didn't want the Navy to have planes, Raeder didn't want Goering in charge of naval aviation, and Hitler just wanted everything finished yesterday. In the end, Graf Zeppelin became the naval equivalent of a group project where one does all the work, but everyone still fails. Avid viewers will know it pains me to say it, but is Graf Zeppelin cursed? Oh boy, you better believe it.
Durka, Muhammad Jihad. Haka Sherpa Bakala.
And now, from the land of make-believe maritime capability, we bring you the Shahed Begari. A ship that's not just cursed, it's completely fake. Has a nation ever expended so much cash on military hardware and gotten so little in return as the medieval terrorists who have mismanaged the great nation of Iran since 1979?
This is my weapon. I will be a laughingstock.
This glorious attempt at an aircraft carrier by the Iranian Navy was built by converting a container ship into a floating drone launch pad. And by converted, I mean they slapped a helipad on top and prayed no one looked too closely. This vessel began life as a commercial ship built in South Korea by Hyundai, which, irony, is a close US ally. It was later acquired by Iran, where it received the kind of naval retrofit you usually associate with meth lab renovations. They claim it carries UAVs, helicopters, and maybe even underwater drones, but at this point, it might as well carry unicorns and a time machine. It's got one 30mm autocannon, some missile tubes, and what might be Gatling guns or leaf blowers in disguise, but fear not. This paper tiger also has a gym, because if you're going to be a glorified drone barge waiting to get sunk, you might as well go down ripped. Let's be clear, this is not a carrier. Iranian state media hyped it up as a strategic response to the US Navy, which is adorable, because this thing wouldn't last 12 minutes against a Coast Guard cutter, let alone a carrier strike group.
This will put a smile on the faces of the enemy.
The Shahed Begari is the very definition of a vanity project, designed not to project power, but to film YouTube videos about power projection. It exists to terrorize merchant ships, impress dictators, and eventually become target practice for US Navy submariners.
Indulge me. For 1 second, pretend that I'm an idiot.
Okay, I'm there.
In the event of actual combat, its final destination is pre-written, the seabed outside of Bandar Abbas. Whether it's a torpedo, a smart bomb, or a mechanical failure from sneezing too hard near the aluminum welds, this ship's expiration date is less a question of if and more a matter of how loud. Is this ship cursed? We'll let the local goat population decide. And finally, dear viewer, we have Shinano, the single most cursed aircraft carrier ever built, and maybe the most spectacular waste of naval engineering in world history. This wasn't just cursed, this was a monument to strategic failure, a floating oops made of 65,000 tons of steel. Possibly the least photographed vessel in modern naval history, which makes a featured spot in a show called Cursed Ship Images particularly difficult, Shinano started life as the third Yamato-class battleship, which were designed to shrug off shells like a sumo wrestler dodging marshmallows. But after Japan lost 4 carriers at Midway, the Imperial Navy panicked and said, "Quick, convert this battleship into a carrier." How hard could that be?
Tell him, Wash.
It's incredibly hard.
By the time they were done, they had a monster. They should have called it Godzilla. 872 feet long with battleship-level armor, triple-deck hangars, and anti-air guns stapled to every flat surface, and all of that just to carry 47 aircraft. That's barely enough for one decent air show. And here's the kicker. She wasn't even finished when they sent her out to sea. Bulkheads weren't sealed, watertight doors hadn't been installed, the crew had no damage control training, and hundreds of civilian workers were still on board during her maiden voyage, probably trying to figure out where the walls were supposed to go. 10 days after commissioning, 10, she set sail from Yokosuka to Kure, carrying a full load of kamikaze planes and Oka rocket bombs. Somewhere out there, the gods of naval warfare were already crying and shaking their heads. Enter USS Archerfish, a Belau-class submarine that had been following her like a shark eyeing a certain Amity beach.
Sick vandalism.
4 torpedoes later, the world's largest aircraft carrier rolled over and sank. Think about that. Years of construction, thousands of man-hours, an entire Yamato-class hull gone in one morning. She never launched a single aircraft, never saw combat, never even got a chance to get the new ship smell out of her compartments. If we gave out medals for catastrophic waste of resources, Shinano wouldn't just win, she'd be the medal. She is the Titanic of warships, except even Titanic made it mostly across the Atlantic. Shinano's greatest contribution to history was giving US submariners bragging rights and future historians a chance to say, wow, really? Can someone please translate Giga Cursed into Japanese for me? And that, dear viewers, wraps up our deep dive into the worst carriers to ever disgrace a flight deck. Ships so cursed, they didn't just struggle to launch planes, they struggled to justify their own existence. What do they all have in common? Ambition unchecked by practicality, designs driven by desperation, and the universal truth that slapping a flight deck on something doesn't mean it's ready for war. If you enjoyed this episode, hit that like button and subscribe for more naval nonsense. Drop a comment letting us know what other cursed carriers deserve to be on this list. Until next time, keep your hangars clear, your damage control trained, and please, for the love of Neptune, don't let the Luftwaffe design your Navy's air wing. I'm Jack Russell with Bearing Straight. Thanks for watching.